Washington Times Politically Unstable. Today, I'm joined by Ken Timmerman. He's a senior fellow at AFPI, author of 14 nonfiction books, as well as some fiction books. And his latest book is coming out on October 15th. It's called The Iran House, Tales of Revolution, Persecution, War, and Intrigue. And it will be released by Post Hill Press. Ken, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, Kelly. It's a pleasure.
So you did an op-ed for us that was really interesting. It was looking at, the threat of Iran. We all know that Iran has pledged to kill some former Trump administration officials, as well as President Trump himself. There's been reports of that. I want to delve into your work during the Trump administration and why Iran views both President Trump and some of his senior national security advisors like Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, et cetera, as threats, and why are there, basically bounties on their heads?
Yeah. Well, I've been dealing with Iran for almost 40 years, and I set up an organization called the Foundation for Democracy in Iran to help the pro-freedom movement in 1995. With the National Endowment for Democracy, which gets a lot of bad press these days. But we worked with them for about 3 years, up until the 1999 student revolt in Iran, and pioneered kind of what was then not very well known was internet human rights reporting. We got people to send us photographs of stormtroopers coming into the university and throwing kids off of third-story balconies. It had never been done before, and we posted them out electronically. But in the Trump administration, I was not working in the White House. I was, as a private individual, an author, a consultant, working with victims of terrorism, with the 9/11 attacks, helping them to track down the Iranian involvement. And we won a judgment against Iran for their involvement in the 9/11 attack. And during that work, I debriefed a large number of Iranian defectors, people who worked for Iranian intelligence, who had continued to have inside information, who had access in some cases to the Supreme Leader's office. This is the very top of the regime in Iran. And when Donald Trump became president, it was clear that our intelligence agencies had pretty much lost the capability. The CIA lost several networks of spies during Obama and really didn't have anybody left inside Iran. So at a certain point, I got a knock on the door. And two guys showed up and showed their badges. They showed their creds and said, "Are you willing to help your nation in its fight against terrorism?" And of course I am. What else are you going to respond? Of course I'm willing to do whatever I can to prevent people from getting killed in this country. I work as a journalist, but I also work, as I said, with victims of terrorism. And I feel very strongly about that, having been a hostage myself in Lebanon in the 1980s. So I began working these Iranian defectors as sub-agents. I was an agent runner for the U.S. intelligence community for about 4 or 5 years. And I tell that story in the Iran House. It's a very unusual story. I'm able to tell the story because I was not a U.S. government employee, so I was not under the kind of restrictions. I had no access to secret information. I do not have a security clearance, but I had the particularity of that everything that I would write or submit would then become classified. So can't access my own files or the things that were sent into the government. But everything that I dealt with was on an unclassified basis because these were people who were not working for the U.S. government, and neither was I. But again, the goal was to prevent terrorist attacks, and in particular, the attack that was looming in early January 2020 in Baghdad.
And what was that? And what was that? Can you just remind our viewers and listeners as to what was brewing in January 2020?
Sure. Over that New Year's period, from Christmas holiday through New Year's, thousands of Iraqi so-called militants is what the press likes to call them, terrorists, members of the People's Mobilization Forces were gathering around the United States Embassy. And it appeared that they were going to storm the embassy. And I had information from my subsources that was, again, being reported into the U.S. intelligence community and directly to the White House, that this was a very real thing. They were not just protesting. They were planning to storm the U.S. embassy, to take it over, and to take U.S. diplomats hostage. And obviously, the first thing that came into everybody's mind is 1979 Tehran, right? The hostage crisis in Iran, but also Benghazi in 2012, when Hillary Clinton refused to come to the aid of our diplomats and the Navy SEALs and the people working to protect the CIA officers on the ground there in Benghazi, and 4 of them got killed as a result of it. So Trump did something that former presidents did not do. Immediately, he mobilized several hundred U.S. Marines from Kuwait and flew them up in helicopters. They came up right away. They were there within hours. Something no other president had done. If they had done that in Benghazi, we wouldn't be talking about people who had been killed in Benghazi in 2012. So that was the first thing he did. The second thing was to look beyond that and say, wait, who's behind this? Who's doing all this? The Iranians had just killed 3 contractors, U.S. contractors as well, and that also was on Trump's mind very, very much. He vowed not to allow Americans to get killed like that on the battlefield without taking actions in response. And so we were looking at this, and it was clear the man behind it was Qassem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force. And the question came up, and this is what I tell in the book, The Iran House. The question came up, well, what should we do? How should we respond to Soleimani and that? And every so-called Iran expert was telling the president, we can't do this. We can't go after them hard. If we hit them hard, it's going to be war. Lindsey Graham is reportedly had played golf with the president 2 days before New Year's, according to Bob Woodward, Graveyard Bob. And Lindsey Graham reportedly told the president it would be world war if he took out Qassem Soleimani. It would be the worst thing he could possibly do. And so I was asked that question as well. And my response was, you have to hit them very, very hard. Don't just have a pinprick strike. Don't do something, a token response. If you're going to hit them at all, you have to hit them very hard. And there's precedent for it. Ronald Reagan took out a third of the Iranian Navy in 1988, Operation Praying Mantis, a third of the Navy in 24 hours in response to the Iranians mining the Strait of Hormuz and, trying to stop the flow of oil, Iraqi oil at that point, going out the Strait of Hormuz. And a U.S. destroyer was hit. And Reagan said, we're not going to let that happen. That is not going to happen. And so he ordered the Navy and Special Forces to take out Iranian surface ships, to hit oil platforms, destroy their oil platforms. And I said, what I was asked, we have to do something like that. You have to hit them hard so they do not get up and do not come back at you quickly.
Well, the only way deterrence works is through decisive, strong actions like President Trump took with Soleimani, and it was a successful mission. It was very precise. And I think it was a moment in time where we all felt proud to be Americans. But then, of course, you did have the media, you did have the Iran experts saying there's going to be retaliation, there's going to be escalation. And we didn't really ever see that. But what you're saying is that as soon as that drone strike happened, and Soleimani was killed, what did the Iranian regime do?
Well, in the immediate aftermath, they did absolutely nothing. The professor, Esmail Khani, who took over, was scared. He was afraid. He wasn't going out. He wasn't traveling to Lebanon. He wasn't traveling to Syria. He wasn't going to Iraq. He hunkered down for a good 6 months, if my memory's correct, and possibly longer than that, until he, reworked his security and he felt, that he had things under control. But they were scared. They were deterred. Now, after that, it was 2 years after that. So this is now under Biden, January of 2022, and that's the story I tell in the commentary piece in the Washington Times today. 2 years after that, they start to formulate these plans to assassinate President Trump, and they formulate the plans because they know that Joe Biden is a friend of theirs. Biden is sympathetic to the mullahs in Tehran. So is Harris. Their advisors have been working closely with the Iranian regime for years. Philip Gordon, who's the national security advisor for Vice President Harris, he was one of the people with John Kerry who helped negotiate the 2015 Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal. He hired some of these so-called Iran experts who have direct ties back to the regime into senior positions in the Obama administration. One of them is still at the Defense Department today under Biden. She's a senior, she's the staff director, I believe, of U.S. SOCOM, the Special Operations Command, with top secret security clearances. And we know that she has deep ties to Tehran, and she was emailing Iranian officials asking them whether she should go to conferences or not, things like that. So the Iranians knew that they had a friend in the White House with Joe Biden, and that if they plotted to kill Donald Trump and got caught, they likely would not pay a big price. And I tell some of the accounts, they got caught 3 times. They got caught 3 times, and the U.S. government did basically nothing. Basically nothing.
And when you say they got caught 3 times, the first time was with John Bolton, no? It was a foiled assassination attempt on his life.
That's right. That was in 2022. And so they put out an arrest warrant for an Iranian Quds Force operative who had hired somebody, who was trying to hire somebody locally. And of course, he skipped town. The second time was in the next year, 23. Again, FBI puts out a sealed indictment, which they later unsealed, against a Quds Force operator in the United States trying to hire assassins to kill President Trump and other former officials. And there are several other officials who were also targeted, Mike Pompeo and Robert Greenway and others who were involved in Iran policy. And the most recent one is on July 12th, the day before the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. The day before, the FBI actually arrests, this time, a Pakistani man who's working with Iranian intelligence, and he is arrested just before leaving for the airport to return to Pakistan and then to Iran, and indicted on for plotting to assassinate the president. Now, was he tied to either of the would-be assassins, either from Butler, Pennsylvania, or the one by Trump's golf club? We don't know. The FBI hasn't told us anything, hasn't profiled the would-be assassins. We don't know their motives. But there's an awful lot of coincidence there. There's smoke. There's an awful lot of smoke in the air that looks like a coincidence to just be swept aside.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned in the piece was the fact that, it was, I'm not sure if it was the Ayatollah or the Supreme Leader of Iran, basically put out a video of President Trump and Mike Pompeo golfing on President Trump's course down in West Palm Beach. Yeah. And it was the 6th hole. It was the same hole. They showed a sniper, basically going through an assassination attempt on President Trump. And this was a video that was released from Iran before this scenario played out at all. Do you think the would-be assassin could he have been contracted by Iran, or do you think he might have seen this video online and taken pointers from it? This seems like a huge coincidence.
It sure does, doesn't it? And I don't know what the truth is. The FBI is not telling us. We do know that the would-be assassin was praising Iran before he was arrested. He liked the Iranian regime, and he did not like President Trump. But the details are so eerily they resemble the video so eerily. He was in that same place. He had that same view that you see in this video that was posted to Twitter 2 years earlier by the Supreme Leader's account. It was on his Twitter account. And by the way, this was before Elon Musk bought Twitter. So Twitter figured that was not hate speech. That was okay. That was not an incitation to violence. It was quite okay if the Supreme Leader was talking about assassinating Trump. But should Donald Trump talk about standing up for freedom or talk about election security, that was really awful. Hate speech and insurrectionist.
I'd like you to explain to our listeners and to our viewers exactly how these terror networks work, because it's not all organized. How does social media play a role? Do they try to radicalize Americans here on U.S. soil? What is the risk of the porous, open southern border? Like, how do these assassination attempts come about? It's not as though Iranians are, coming over here via airplane, getting off and planning a major, assassination attempt.
So the Iranian intelligence establishment has got, there are basically two flavors. You've got the Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guards, military intelligence types, and then you've got MOIS or Vaja, the Ministry of Information and Security, the Etelat, and they are the civilian intelligence. Both of them have extensive networks in the United States. They have agents in place. They have networks of agents in place. They have sympathizers in place in the Iranian community, but also outside the Iranian community. And they've been working these networks for years and years and years. Now, as a general rule, they try to keep those intelligence networks clean. They try to keep them away from wet operations, from assassination operations. And I can't tell you for a fact that any of those networks were actually used with the three known assassination attempts by the Iranians. In those attempts and in the attacks on Iranian dissidents in the United States, Masih Ali-Najad, among others, the Iranians would actually bring in an operative from Tehran. They would fly him in. They would. And he'd hang around for a while. He would be given contacts, probably by either the stay behind networks or by Iranian intelligence back in Tehran, people to get in touch with. And invariably, they contacted the wrong people. So either they would get somebody. There was one case in 2010 where they tried to blow up the Saudi ambassador at the Watergate Hotel in the restaurant there. And I had a piece in the Washington Times at that time. And I said, if only they had contacted the right Mexican, they might have succeeded. But the Mexican hitman that they hired was a DEA informant. So he was working for the Drug Enforcement Agency. And so they were following the plot all along, and they were able to foil it. But goodness gracious, we can't just depend on good luck and on mistakes that the Iranians make. And that's what I think is so troubling right now, is that, you look at these two attempts on the former president, and you can't help but conclude he is not getting the protection that he needs and deserves.
And that was going to be, another question to you. The United States, it's not like U.S. intelligence was unaware of these assassination threats against former U.S. officials and the former president of the United States. Everyone knew about this. It was it was not unknown. So wouldn't that, in and of itself, even before the Butler shooting, have prompted more Secret Service protection for the former president? I know he's got a detail already, not even as a former president, but as a former president with an enemy state with a bounty on your head, as well as being the Republican candidate for president. I mean, I just don't understand how the Secret Service failed him in these regards.
You and I think about 120 million Americans don't understand that either, because it just defies logic. It defies experience. We haven't seen this type of hostile foreign power tracking down a former president and a presidential candidate ever,
Mhm.
ever in our history. You had the Kennedy assassination, of course. You had the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. And there have been others that have been foiled as well. But the Secret Service has, they do a tremendous job. And President Trump has always been incredibly has praised them. Every time he talks about the Secret Service, he praises the individual agents and he thanks them. He's quite gracious about it. So it does appear that they're being understaffed. We know now that the requests for extra staffing were turned down by the Biden administration, perhaps the president himself, perhaps Alexander Mayorkas, the head of DHS. We don't know. They're not really telling us. But it's a disgrace. It's truly a disgrace. Put the shoe on the other foot. If this attempt had been against Kamala Harris or against Joe Biden, I guarantee you, every Democrat in Congress would be calling on Secret Service to double up their protective details, and of course, they would be blaming Republicans. I'm glad to see that people on Trump's side have not been making a political issue out of this as much as they could if they were Democrats. I think they're behaving responsibly, and I appreciate that.
So kind of looking into the future and looking what happened after Trump's second assassination attempt, it's almost as if the media has begun to normalize these assassination attempts on former President Trump. I think a lot of us out here, or Democrats in particular, just shrug and say, the Iranian threat isn't real. It's just a bunch of talk. They're not serious when they mean they really want to assassinate the former president. And even if they did, they don't have the resources to execute on that. And if you look at Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's statements after the second assassination attempt, they were just like, we got to cool down the political rhetoric in the United States. But if Iran is serious, what could the Biden administration do? I mean, they are still in charge. Biden is still the president of the United States. Kamala Harris is still the president of the United States. To let Iran know that this sort of behavior is not acceptable and will not ever happen on U.S. soil.
Well, there are dozens of things that they could do. I lay out some of them in a policy piece that I did for America First Policy Institute recently, calling for a maximum pressure, maximum support policy towards the Iranian regime, maximum pressure on the regime, such as Donald Trump had for 4 years as president, and then maximum support for the Iranian people to help them in their quest for freedom against this authoritarian regime, which is actually imposed. It's not even an Iranian regime. Many of them are Arab Muslims who are leading this country. Look, for one, you shouldn't be inviting the president, the so-called president, the selected president of the Iranian regime to New York to speak on the same day as President Biden in front of the United Nations. I mean, that is just so outrageous. It's an insult, I think, to Americans. And second, you should go back and enforce the sanctions, which are still in principle in place on Iranian oil sales. The Biden administration, by not enforcing those sanctions, has allowed Iran to go from 400,000 barrels a day of exports, which is what they were doing at the end of Trump's presidency, to over 2.5 million today, most of it going to communist China. That is earning them tens of billions of dollars that they can use for terrorism. The estimates are about $100 billion so far in excess earnings because this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has not imposed sanctions. Then there are tons of things that we could do to empower the Iranian people. We could ask Elon Musk to get involved, to put up a Starlink network so Iranians could communicate during protest demonstrations and let the world know what is going on. I have long believed that if you rip off that shroud of darkness that the Iranian regime tries to impose on them, they shut off the internet when they crack down on demonstrators. I think that would change things a lot. Shedding light on the repressive actions of this regime in Tehran, I think would have a major impact on public opinion, and also would give the people a boost themselves, would encourage them.
Now, how serious do you think the threat is on Donald Trump's life? Now, there's been 3 foiled assassination attempts, and it seems like they hired the wrong hitman. They got it seems like a sloppy intelligence kind of operation, if you will. Does Iran have the resources and the capabilities to actually carry out one of these assassination attempts?
I think they do. And I don't want to get into the details that I've learned from some of the subagents that I was running for the intelligence community, but they have networks that they have not yet brought to bear, that they've not yet put in action. And they're very serious networks. They're people who are trained, who know how to operate clandestinely, both in the United States and in Canada. So I'm concerned. I'm really concerned. And I know also that since Biden has come in, the U.S. intelligence community, the FBI, the counterintelligence community here has taken Iran off of its plate. They don't want to know. They do not want to know about hostile Iranian intelligence operations in this country. My whole networks were shut down after Biden came into office. And I have to tell people, America doesn't care. They really don't care. They don't want information about what your regime is thinking, what they're plotting, what they're trying to do. It's absolutely extraordinary, Kelly, to realize that our intelligence community does not want to know.
It's like, hear no evil, see no evil, there is no evil.
Yeah.
And that's a very naive way to run a country. And scary. Well, Ken, I really do appreciate your time today. And if everyone will go out and purchase your book on October 15th, it sounds like it's going to be a fascinating read. And I wish you the best of luck with its sales. And I hope that you're able to kind of reestablish your networks, hopefully, if Trump comes back into office, so that we have a better read on kind of the new axis of evil, which includes definitely Iran, Russia, and China.
Iran, Russia, and China. Absolutely. It didn't exist in 2020, and now it's a fully developed alliance. God bless you. Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you.